for families of Dahmer's victims. They will watch as Dahmer is charged with 7 to 9 more murders and as prosecutors describe each of the gruesome killings. And unlike his first court appearance, Dahmer will appear before a judge tomorrow in prison uniform. You may recall in his first court hearing is when we first learned the details of how Dahmer lured 4 victims to his apartment, drugged, killed, and dismembered them. Tomorrow's court hearings on the 7 additional murders should prove to be equally dramatic. Live in Milwaukee, I'm Elizabeth Vargas, Channel 2 News.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Tonight, the mother of one of Dahmer's victims wants Milwaukee to pay for her son's death to the tune of $3 million. Chicagoan Oliver Lacey's body was found dismembered in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment. Tonight, his mother says Lacey would still be alive if police had done their job.
It's nothing that could replace my son at all.
Money have nothing to do with it, because that's not going to bring him back, but a little justice can be done.
The money is not the object, it's what justice. We want justice for her brother and my son.
The lawsuit claims that police should have arrested Jeffrey Dahmer in May, but botched the case. It targets the city of Milwaukee and the 3 police officers involved in that case.
Jeffrey Dahmer has confessed to many murders, many things, but the surprises just keep coming. Tonight, his detailed accounts of cannibalism, telling police he ate one of his victim's right biceps. He described the kitchen utensils necessary, including a heavy cast-iron skillet. Police even documented Dahmer's recipe, a frying process using, among other things, vegetable lard. Dahmer has said throughout his interviews with police that he killed so his victims would not leave him after sexual trysts. Since the first reports of cannibalism, the most difficult question is why. In fact, experts have created profiles which find common threads among those who find killing isn't enough. They also dismember. It was a shock to police when they found what Jeffrey Dahmer had been hiding in his apartment. In the freezer, in a vat, on shelves, the dismembered remains of 11 victims. And Dahmer's not alone in this kind of crime. They are crimes so heinous we are at a loss to comprehend them. During the spring and summer of 1978, 4 dismembered torsos were found in areas of rural Cook County. Larry Eiler, apprehended by police after a dismembered body was found in a dumpster behind his home. Pilot Mark Wilkinson, suspected of killing, then mutilating the body of his wife.
Dismemberment is one of the ultimate expressions of contempt for a human being. It answers the question, what can you do to a human being beyond depriving them of their lives?
According to Dr. Yudovsky, there are 3 motivating factors to dismemberment. Dismembering a victim is a simpler way to dispose of a body, to disguise the crime. It expresses ultimate contempt and hatred toward the victim. Or it expresses a psychotic identification with the victim, as if eating a heart of a lion would cause the killer to gain courage and strength. Though most serial killers do not dismember the body.
Jeffrey Dahmer in court facing 8 more counts of murder.
Right to a trial by jury and a right to a preliminary examination.
Yes, I do.
And you've discussed that with your lawyer also.
Yes.
Dahmer relaxed, seemingly unmoved, appearing before a packed Milwaukee courtroom. The families of his victims are there too. They, like the rest of us, hoping for a glimpse into the mind of a serial killer. Our top story at 4:30, new courtroom revelations in the Dahmer murder case. Prosecutors announcing in a hearing this afternoon that Dahmer is now officially charged with 12 murders. He has admitted killing 17 people. Also in court, officials tell the judge more murder charges may be filed against him. In that same hearing, Dahmer's bail is raised to $5 million cash, and the judge orders the release of body parts to the victims' families for burial. Channel 2's Jay Levine is live at the courthouse with the very latest. Jay?
Lester, prosecutors finished what they'd started 10 days ago, compiling information from the long-winded confessions of Jeffrey Dahmer, arranging it into court documents and formal charges. Dahmer himself appeared much the same as he did. His appearance slightly altered, shaving off a new-grown beard from last time, but his attitude was the same, with short, curt answers to the judge's questions. Here are excerpts from the short court hearing.
As to counts 1 through 8, you are charged with first-degree intentional homicide, which carries a life imprisonment penalty. In addition thereto, you're also charged in habitual criminality, which carries an additional 10 years on each count. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You also understand the nature of these proceedings, the complaint itself?
Yes, Your Honor.
Does the court wish to address the question of bail?
The court would.
If it please the court, the bail in the amount of $1 million was set on July 25. We have now added 8 additional counts, so there are 12 counts of first-degree intentional homicide with the very obvious, significant, weighty sentences. I would suggest to the court might wish to add to the bail of $1 million. Should be in cash, of course.
Based upon the nature and gravity of the offenses, defendant's prior criminal record, the degree of violence that is contained in the four corners of the complaint, and the penalties the defendant faces, the court's going to increase the bail to $5 million cash for the case.
Members of the family have expressed a keen desire to recover their bodies, remains, in some cases, parts of remains of their loved ones.
There is no reason to ask that any of the body parts remain and that they should be released to the families. Mr. Dahmer wholeheartedly agrees.
You've discussed that aspect of with your lawyer, Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, we did, Your Honor.
Are you in a complete agreement with that?
I'm in agreement.
Dahmer's confession has proved to be a two-edged sword. Prosecutors know more than they can do based on that confession. They can only do so much based on the physical evidence that they have in hand. As for Dahmer's defense, they're limited too by the volume of material contained in that confession. The lawyers sitting on opposite sides in this case, prosecutor Mike McCann and defense lawyer Jerry Boyle, have done battle before in this and other arenas. McCann besting Boyle in a Democratic primary before winning election as Milwaukee County DA. So far, though, they've disagreed on little. McCann deciding to charge on only 12 of the 16 murders Dahmer's confessed to here in Wisconsin because Dahmer disposed of the remains of the other 4.
The investigation will continue. One of the counts is premised on where there is no body, and we will continue to evaluate the police evidence as it comes in. And if it meets the sufficient burden of proof, as I indicated to the court, we will file an additional count.
Boyle has objected to little, making no challenge to evidence, even saying he probably won't seek to move the trial out of Milwaukee. Judge Wagner has already ruled that there is probable cause to hold Dahmer, and while he's now entitled to a preliminary hearing later this month, Boyle may even waive that.
If I decide that a preliminary hearing is going to be helpful, I will have one. If I decide it's not necessary, I may not have it. I don't know that yet, but it will be done. It will be done with a great deal of thought, and I might furthermore suggest that I don't necessarily have many preliminary hearings.
So there wasn't much in the way of fireworks for the overflow crowd, some of whom arrived at 8:30 this morning to assure themselves seats for the hearing. Tight security had much of the 4th floor sealed off, and everyone who wanted to enter the courtroom was thoroughly searched. Fireworks or not, today's court hearing was clearly a hot ticket, people waiting a long time to get in. Half the space was set aside for family members of Dahmer's victims. Channel 2's Elizabeth Vargas was covering that story. Elizabeth?
Jay, for many of the victims' family members, this was their first chance to see Jeffrey Dahmer for themselves up close. More than 50 seats in the crowded courtroom were set aside just for those family members. Special counselors from Milwaukee's Victim Assistance Program were on hand to help them deal with seeing Dahmer. For many, it was an emotional experience. They say it was something they had to do. Dozens of victims' family members walked silently, grimly into the courtroom today to confront a killer.
I just had to see who murdered my brother and just look at him.
I just wanted to see what type of person could commit those kinds of crimes, you know.
Some came in anger, some with the need to understand how this man could kill so many, why he killed their brother, their uncle, their son.
To me, he looked like any ordinary person, you know. But he don't look like he's, you know, insane or nothing like that.
I can understand how the people could have failed for his stories because he doesn't look like the type of person that would commit the crimes that he did.
Looks like he doesn't give a damn. Looks like he doesn't care at all. He has no remorse at all. I think he could kill another 20 if he had time to do it, yeah.
In moments, the court hearing was over. Jeffrey Dahmer returned to jail, and the families returned home. Their questions unanswered, their grief as painful as ever.
My heart still hurts. You know, he's taken someone that my grandparents had brought in, who gave him the right. I don't understand that. And the way that he taken him. I would have preferred that someone shot him instead of destroying his body like that.
One of the last family members to enter the courtroom was a former Chicagoan whose son had just moved from Oak Park to Milwaukee when he was killed by Jeffrey Dahmer. We'll hear more from her tonight at 5:30. But first at 5, we'll hear some new details on those 8 new murder counts that were filed against Jeffrey Dahmer today. And we'll talk live to Jeffrey Dahmer's defense attorney, Gerald Boyle. Reporting live in Milwaukee, I'm Elizabeth Vargas, Channel 2 News.
Elizabeth, I had heard earlier reports about where Jeffrey Dahmer lived, the apartment complex, and neighbors supposedly being put up in a hotel to get away from the publicity seekers and get away from even some of the media. Tell me about that.
In fact, many of the people who live in that apartment building are having a hard time dealing with all the crowds coming by to see this, and most importantly, having a hard time dealing with the fact that in the apartment next door or above them or below them, so many men were killed allegedly, and Jeffrey Dahmer has admitted to dismembering those bodies in that room that is so close to them. They're having a very difficult time dealing with that. Some special counselors who've arrived in town in Milwaukee who specialize in this kind of thing, and the Red Cross, are reportedly helping these people move out of the building, and while they're looking for a new place to live, they're putting them up in hotels downtown. Right now, they're keeping the names of those hotels kind of secret. They'd like to keep it quiet because these people have had enough. They've had enough of people looking at them. They've had enough of people wondering why they didn't.
It's his day in court since becoming notorious as a confessed serial killer. All eyes are on the fair-haired Dahmer as he silently enters the courtroom and live television coverage. This time, he wears orange jail fatigues, no sports shirt. This time, he is clean-shaven, exposing a delicate face, really. Coolly, he answers new homicide charges. Here's the latest. Prosecutors file 8 additional murder charges against Dahmer, raising the total to 12. They say more counts are possible because he is admitted to 17 killings. And the judge raises Dahmer's bail to $5 million.
An important part of today's story did not happen in open court. Prosecutors released a lot more information about the Dahmer killings in court papers filed this afternoon. Channel 2's Jay Levine has been looking through those papers and joins us now from Milwaukee to report on what he found out. Jay?
Linda, Jeffrey Dahmer now stands charged with 12 murders. 12 murders committed in a span of just over 3 years. All that we learned in court today as the state completed outlining its case against Jeffrey Dahmer. A clean-shaven Jeffrey Dahmer appeared for his second court appearance today. Dressed in an Orange County Jail jumpsuit, he was brought here from a cell in another part of the building. He knew it was coming. 8 more murder charges, which had been explained to him by his lawyer earlier this afternoon.
I went through and read with him every count of his complaint. I asked if he understood it, to which he responded that he did, in fact.
Dahmer showed no emotion during the proceedings, looking down or straight ahead as prosecutors detailed their case.
We have now added 8 additional counts, so there are 12 counts of first-degree intentional homicide with the very obvious significant weighty sentences. The habitual criminality alone would add 120 years.
The charges were the result of court documents filed today, revealing more about Dahmer's alleged murder spree, detailing the final 12 murders from March of 1989, just before he began a 10-month jail term, resuming just after his release in May or June of 1990. He killed twice in September of that year, then not until early '91, when he claimed 2 victims in February and April. A final furious killing spree began late in May. When it was over, 6 were dead, 4 in the last 3 weeks. It's clear the killings came in bunches, with Dahmer claiming he killed no one in between.
It'll be our job to see whether or not what they put down in paper is what my client says took place. So we'll just have to take that a step at a time.
Other documents reveal other information. For example, the case against Konarak Sinthasamphun, that murder. It was revealed today in these court documents that Dahmer allegedly left the apartment after he drugged the 14-year-old Laotian youth, went for a beer in a local tavern, came back and found the youth had escaped and was staggering down the street. He caught up with him about the same time police arrived. Then he says, after convincing police they were just friends, police left and he killed the youth. Also contained in these court documents today, more details about sex acts committed on the bodies after death and pictures taken while he was dismembering those bodies. Joining us live this afternoon is Jerry Boyle, defense attorney for Jeffrey Dahmer. You heard it in court. You'd obviously heard the story before. But take us, if you will, inside some of the rooms where you've spent with Jeffrey Dahmer, some of the time you spent talking to him. He was very contrite, you said, at the beginning, 2 weeks ago. How is he now? Detail for me how his attitude has changed, if at all.
I'm dealing with Mr. Dahmer the same way I deal with any person that I represent, in a very professional, businesslike manner. It is not a psychological or a sociological kind of discussion we have. I don't see any change in his demeanor during the time that I talk to him. We talk about things and ask and answer questions because I have to know certain things. There's a very serious mental inquiry going on in order for me to find out what Mr. Dahmer was all about. You've read it, how horrific it is, how terrible it is, and it's going to be clear that our job is going to find out the why of it. So basically, his demeanor is no different than it was the first time I talked to him.
He was sorry, you said at the beginning, when you read a statement he authorized you to make. He was sorry. Does he appear the same way? Is he caught up in the procedure that's going on, or does he still that overwhelming regret?
He's the same overwhelming regret, and he shows the same emotions that he had from day one.
Jerry Boyle, thank you very much for joining us. I know you're very busy. Coming up at 5:30, we'll be joined by E. Michael McCann, who is the prosecuting attorney in this case, to help us outline more of what's contained in these documents. Live in Milwaukee, I'm Jay Levine, Channel 2 News. Bill, Linda?
Thank you, Jay. Dahmer's day in court prompted an emotional reaction from the families of his victims. They saw Jeffrey Dahmer face to face for the first time. Relatives packed the courtroom. They sat solemnly, some staring at the man responsible for their grief. Several described him as a remorseless killer who turned their lives upside down.
You can't explain how you're going through. You know what you're going through. I haven't yet cried yet.
I'll be here every time he's in court.
Why?
Because I feel I owe it to my brother and I should be here. He would do it for me.
Other relatives are saying similar things tonight, vowing also to be at every court hearing. Some relatives expressed outrage that bail, although high, was even set at all.
Channel 2 News has obtained a copy of the original police report detailing Dahmer's confession. It is a chilling confession, an unemotional remembrance of sex, death, and dismemberment. And Channel 2's Jim Avila is here with the story. Jim?
Bill, from the beginning, Jeffrey Dahmer has wanted to talk about his crimes. In this police report obtained by Channel 2 News, Dahmer answers questions, volunteers information, and signs confessions. When police are ready to leave his jail cell, he asks them to stay around a while and talk some more about the murders. This is the public's first look at the serial killer's trail of obscenity through his own eyes. Jeffrey Dahmer started to talk from the moment of his arrest. Inside his apartment, where police saw and recovered skulls, pictures of mutilated bodies, and a vat of decomposed tissue. Inside the squad car, where he sat next to a detective. And at the Milwaukee City Jail, Dahmer talked, in matter-of-fact tones, admitting to mass murder. The formal questioning began at 1:15 in the morning, July 23rd. And by 7:15 the same morning, Milwaukee police had their case. The homicide file against Jeffrey Dahmer was open. There were multiple victims. Inside the report, police had a signed 4-page confession, each page initialed by Dahmer. During the 6 hours of questioning, punctuated by cigarettes, 5 cups of coffee, 2 glasses of water, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola, suspect Jeffrey Dahmer admits to 15 killings. Dahmer poured out the details, filling police in on the killing process. First, sex. He says it was never forced, always willing. Then when the victim wanted to leave, a special drink of rum and coffee laced with sleeping pills was served. When his victim passes out, he's murdered. Dahmer disposes of the body by mutilation. The police report is written without emotion, 24 pages, including Polaroid pictures of perversion that give new details about what went on at 924 North 25th Street in Milwaukee, Jeffrey Dahmer's house of horrors. Police found 6 skulls in the apartment. 3 of the skulls from his latest victims were in the refrigerator. 3 were preserved, skin removed with acid, bone painted gray to look artificial, and then put on display. Dahmer told detectives, quote, he only kept the good-looking ones because he did not want to lose them. Dahmer kept other body parts of a sexual nature in formaldehyde. They, too, were on display in jars. He told police he kept them for sexual gratification. They, quote, brought back memories of the victim. In what high-ranking police detectives label a bonanza of evidence, Jeffrey Dahmer not only talked about what he had done, but why he killed. This report reveals that Dahmer thought of himself as a spurned lover. Throughout his confession, Dahmer took great pains to tell police that he liked his victims, got along well with them, and was paranoid about being left behind. Dahmer admits he hunted and killed only homosexuals who became his lovers, if for only a brief time. Quote, he felt he could hang on to them if he would kill them and keep their skulls. During the questioning, the Milwaukee Police Department was extremely careful in their handling of Jeff Dahmer. They document the amenities granted him during questioning: plenty to drink, no hot lights, access to the restroom, and after 6 hours of interrogation, even an offer of food, to which Dahmer replied, quote, I'm not hungry and probably will not be hungry for a long time. Bill and Linda.
Thanks, Jim.
Our coverage of the Milwaukee...
The lawyers trying to put together a defense for Jeffrey Dahmer tonight. Dahmer came face to face with justice in court this afternoon, sitting quietly as prosecutors filed 8 new murder charges against him. The judge has raised his bond to $5 million cash, and an agreement has been worked out to return the remains of the victims to their families. Channel 2's Jay Levine watched it all happen in Milwaukee. Jay?
It's a story which has gripped this city for 2 weeks now, ever since people got up here 2 weeks ago today to the news that a serial killer had been captured. Today, prosecutors finished outlining their case against Jeffrey Dahmer to people who were hanging on every word. There were far more people than there were seats in the Public Safety Building courtroom. People had begun lining up at 8:30 this morning. All were thoroughly searched before being allowed into the courtroom for a live glimpse of the man accused of being the worst serial killer in the history of Wisconsin, to read his expressions, to hear his brief responses to a judge's questions.
You're also charged in habitual criminality, which carries an additional 10 years on each count. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You also understand the nature of these proceedings, the complaint itself?
Yes, Your Honor.
This court document contained 8 new counts of murder, along with 4 others filed 10 days ago. Charges that prompted the prosecutor to ask for an increase in Dahmer's $1 million cash bail.
The temptation to this defendant to take flight were he somehow to secure freedom would be immense. Under those circumstances, I would suggest to the court might wish to add to the bail of $1 million. Should be in cash, of course.
Mr. Boyle?
No argument.
The court's going to increase the bail to $5 million cash for the case.
There was no dispute from any of those in court about raising the bail to $5 million. Jeffrey Dahmer was not going to make $1 million bail, and the $5 million may be just symbolic. Let's ask the person who asked for it, or asked for a larger bail. He is E. Michael McCann, who is the district attorney of the county of Milwaukee. Why ask for the increase in bail? Symbolic or practical?
Well, the very serious charges, of course, 12 first-degree intentional homicides could lead to, obviously, the man would never get out. The temptation to flee, if he could get out, raise the bail, would be overwhelming, and he certainly would not be back.
You outlined 8 more charges of murder in the court documents today. What kind of picture do they paint, taken as a whole, about Jeffrey Dahmer?
The very words themselves, I can't go beyond that, but here we have him meeting individuals, luring them to the apartment, drugging them, strangling them, and dismembering them. Need to say more. I do, however, wish to point out, as our Supreme Court rules require, that there is a presumption of innocence, the mere fact that there are allegations, and that presumption continues unless and until such time as he's found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
You met with family members today. Tell me how that went.
We met for them for half an hour, the medical examiner and I, to discuss with them the legalities of what was happening, the release of the remains. They're deeply religious people, some of these people, and they're in great pain, great anguish, some in great anger. And we wanted to reconcile as best we could to let them know what was happening to help them deal with it.
Defense Attorney Jerry Boyle, your former colleague in the district attorney's office, is talking openly about a defense of mental defect, mental disease. How will you approach that?
Well, we never stipulate to that in terms, I can't tell you that's his decision, but we never, as a long-standing policy, if that's the issue, it will be contested. There will not be an agreement on that.
Do not the facts of the case indicate a mental disease, a mental defect?
No.
How could anyone sane have done this?
Well, our jury instructions in the definition of insanity say merely that it's a serious crime. You cannot from that alone infer that the man is insane, and indeed the presumption in Wisconsin is the burden is on the defendant to prove that he's sane, that he's insane.
What does that mean?
Well, that means that the burden, if that issue is raised, that Mr. Boyle will have to persuade the jury or the hearer of the fact that the man was mentally ill. The burden is on the defense. Usually it's on the state to prove the case, but on the issue of insanity, it shifts to the defense.
Mr. McCann, thank you very much for joining us. E. Michael McCann, District Attorney of Milwaukee County, defeating Jerry Boyle, oddly enough, in a Democratic primary several years ago for that office, which he eventually won over a Republican. Well, there was a lot going on in court today, and as Mr. McCann said, he met with the victims Also talking with victims today, Channel 2's Elizabeth Vargas, the family's victims, the victims of the family members of the victims. Elizabeth?
Jay, nearly half the courtroom was filled today with family members of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. Many came with pictures of those loved ones pinned to their chests. They say they wanted to remind Jeffrey Dahmer of the people he has so far confessed to killing. One of the people in the courtroom today was Catherine Lacey, whose son Oliver Lacey was one of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims. For any mother, it is an awful thing, confronting the man who murdered and mutilated her son. But Catherine Lacey says she has no choice.
I want justice. To take life at. I want to see justice done.
Catherine's son Oliver Lacey had just moved to Milwaukee from the Chicago area a few months ago, ready to start a new life with his fiancée and his baby. But last month, the track star with big dreams died in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment, another victim of Milwaukee's serial killer. Catherine Lacey came to court today, not just to see Dahmer for herself, but to be seen.
He did not look in none of our faces, you know. He didn't see our faces.
You wished he had?
Yes. And I asked, I want to see his face. I want him to sit in front of me.
Catherine Lacey wants Jeff Dahmer to know her face, to feel her loss. She says she'll be back. She will not let Dahmer forget the pain and the anguish he has caused so many.
Anytime that they will bring, I'm going to be there. I want to see justice done, and I will not stand still until it is done.
Catherine Lacey told me shortly after the courtroom hearing ended today that if she could ask Jeffrey Dahmer one thing, it would be how he was able to lure Oliver to his apartment, how he was able to win her son's trust. Reporting live in Milwaukee, I'm Elizabeth Vargas. Back to you in the newsroom, Walter.
Thank you, Elizabeth and Jay. And moving onward, Milwaukee.
Indicated earlier this morning, before it was drafted, I met with Mr. Dahmer along with my associate. I told Mr. Dahmer the proceedings that were going to take place this date and explained it to him as best I could. He understood what I was saying. He understands the nature of the proceedings against him, and he is able to assist me and Ms. Patricus. Therefore, there is no challenge to competency, and I would like to ask the court to allow Ms. Patricus to make a statement as to what she did relative to this criminal complaint.
Go ahead.
Your Honor, I have in fact met prior to this hearing this afternoon with Mr. Dahmer. I went through and read with him every count of his complaint. I asked if he understood it, to which he responded that he did, in fact. At that time, he had also indicated that he would be willing at this time to waive the reading of the complaint in court here this afternoon. We would not challenge the probable cause on this afternoon for purposes of this hearing.
Is that correct, Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, Your Honor, that's correct.
As to counts 1 through 8, you are charged with first-degree intentional homicide, which carries a life imprisonment penalty. In addition thereto, you're also charged in habitual criminality, which carries an additional 10 years on each count. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You also understand the nature of these proceedings, the complaint itself.
Yes, Your Honor.
You also understand you have a right to a trial by jury and a right to a preliminary examination.
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
And you've discussed that with your lawyer also.
Yes.
If it please the court, at our proceedings on July 25, the court set a date for a preliminary hearing of August 22nd, 1991. That is, of course, was beyond 10 days, and there was an appropriate waiver. The amended complaint, if we continue with the preliminary hearing, I think we will need another waiver as well, so that we have no question raised about the denial of a preliminary hearing within 10 or 20 days.
Mr. Boyle?
Yes, the matter of waiver has been discussed with Mr. Dahmer. He understands and will waive the 10-day requirement, what with the fact that he's in custody.
Is that true and correct, Mr. Dahmer? Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You are doing so voluntarily and knowingly?
Yes, Your Honor.
All right.
Does the court wish to address the question of bail?
The court would.
If it please the court, the bail in the amount of $1 million was set on July 25. That was on 4 counts, and as the court can well anticipate, the temptation to flee where the defendant to somehow secure his freedom would be very substantial. We have now added 8 additional counts, so there are 12 counts of first-degree intentional homicide with the very obvious significant weighty sentences. The habitual criminality alone would add 120 years. The dates start on March 26, 1989, so all of them, all 12 counts, are under life means life. So the temptation to this defendant to take flight were he somehow to secure freedom would be immense. Under those circumstances, I would suggest to the court might wish to add to the bail of $1 million. Should be in cash, of course.
Mr. Boyle?
No argument.
Then based upon the nature of the offenses, which the courts had the opportunity in order to read the complaint has done so, the court does in fact find probable cause as to each additional count of the complaint. And regards to bail, based upon the nature and gravity of the offenses, defendant's prior criminal record, the degree of violence that is contained in the four corners of the complaint, and the penalties the defendant faces, the court's going to increase the bail to $5 million cash for the case.
To please the court, one additional point. Members of the family have expressed a keen desire to recover their parts, remains, in some cases parts remains of their loved ones. And I had discussed this with the medical examiner. He has completed the work of the forensic pathologist. I have, on yesterday's date, I sent a letter to Mr. Boyle, who's received a copy of it filed with the court, requesting whether there would be any concern as to whether or not the medical examiner would proceed to release the bodies. And Mr. Boyle has indicated that he will make a statement in court on that matter.
Mr. Boyle?
Yesterday, I received a request, Mr. McCann, to consider the release of whatever portions of the...
I have your attention, please. I have your attention, please. We'll be conducting a test of the firearm system for the next several minutes. Please disregard any alarms. Thank you.
Will the media coordinator take care of this?
I beg your pardon?
I was talking to Mr. Rodriguez about the media coordinator.
I have discussed that matter with Mr. Dahmer this date. It is my belief that there is no reason to ask that any of the body parts remain and that they should be released to the families. Mr. Dahmer wholeheartedly agrees and has indicated that I am at liberty to make a statement on the record after he having been advised as to my ability to hire a forensic pathologist to do present testing. And that would be waived, obviously, if there is nothing there to test, that he wishes to have those parts released and not be retained. I would furthermore state for the record that I have this date contacted. If one reads the criminal complaint, much of the identification is done by a forensic odontologist. I am confident that that odontologist has retained sufficient information for which somebody in the future need be, or if that time ever came, can review his work product, determine whether or not he is correct in his conclusions and opinions. I have no reason at this time to proffer why Dr. Jensen has to retain anything further, and obviously, therefore, they can use their own discretion on returning whatever they wish to return to the members of the family. Thank you. And I would like to have the court make inquiry, my client, if what I've said is not accurate.
Is that, you discussed that aspect of, with your lawyer, Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, we did, Your Honor.
Are you in a complete agreement with that?
I'm in agreement.
You understand it?
Yes.
Mr. McCann, did you want to say anything more?
It's one additional point, if it please the court. The investigation of this matter continues, and I've advised Mr. Boyle that we may be filing additional counts, that as soon as appropriate evidence is secured and we intend to file such a count, we will immediately notify his office with the hope that we would be able to complete the investigative work and file such additional counts as there may be evidence for, and that we would anticipate filing those on August 22nd, the time of the preliminary hearing, if such proof developed, and that we would alert his office as and when such proof
Center stage in a Milwaukee courtroom. He heard more formal charges of murder placed against him. He saw the prosecutors who will work to send him to prison for life, and he may have felt the eyes of his victims' loved ones, many of whom were seated just a few feet away. Their reactions in a moment. But first, reporter Scott Smith, who was also in that courtroom.
Amid extremely tight security, confessed serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer appeared in a Milwaukee courtroom today to face additional charges stemming from his self-styled House of Horrors. 8 new murder counts have been added to 4 previously filed as the result of the dismembered bodies found in his apartment.
Yes, Your Honor.
In a soft voice, which he has admitted using to lure his victims, Dahmer responded courteously when spoken to by the judge. He showed no emotion when he agreed that body parts should be returned to family members, many of whom looked on. Luckily, they were spared fresh revelations contained in the complaint, but not mentioned in court. Among them, 3 of 7 skulls found in Dahmer's apartment were painted. Dahmer discarded the bones of one victim because he wasn't his type. Another was a deaf mute who Dahmer communicated with in writing. Conorak Synthensamphone, the youth who police ignored in May, actually escaped after Dahmer had left the apartment to get beer, only to run into Dahmer on the street. And Dahmer has admitted having sex with 3 of his victims after their deaths. Further, prosecutors filed 1 murder count today, even though they have no body. A difficult task, but one done in deference to the families.
I'm aware of their concerns. I've talked with them individually, some of them, and we are extremely concerned about the interests of the families.
For the families.
And because that's what ought to be done.
Conversely, defense attorneys express concerns for their client. They admit he's legally competent, but wonder about his continued well-being.
Mr. Dahmer is not the only one that goes through this terrible problem of potential suicide. So yes, it concerns me, but I think the Sheriff's Department is doing a remarkable job in making sure that nothing like that happens.
In all, Dahmer has implicated himself in 17 murders, which leave 5 that he has not been charged with. Prosecutors say their investigation is continuing, and that if they do file further counts, they hope to do so before his preliminary hearing date on August 22nd. In Milwaukee, Scott Smith, Fox News, Chicago.
All right, Scott, now also today, Milwaukee police released the name of Jeffrey Dahmer's 16th victim. Stephen W. Toomey of Milwaukee was last seen in September of 1987 when he was 24 years old. Toomey was reported missing by his parents who live in Michigan.
And most of the spectators packing the Milwaukee courtroom today simply curious about the admitted perpetrator of one of the most sensational crime sprees in history. But some of those who showed up had to see for themselves the man who destroyed a loved one. The relatives of Jeffrey Dahmer's victims found no great revelations in today's proceedings and nothing to change their opinion of the defendant.
He just seemed to be uncaring. He didn't have any remorse or any sorrow, look, anything. He was just there.
Jeffrey Dahmer never even looked at the people who came to look into the eyes of the last person to see their loved ones alive. 31-year-old Anthony Hughes, a deaf mute from Madison, Wisconsin, missing since May 24th.
Room today in Milwaukee.
You also understand the nature of these proceedings, the complaint itself.
Yes, Your Honor.
That was Jeffrey Dahmer's second appearance in court. Good evening, I'm Rick Rosenthal.
And I'm Allison Payne. Dahmer was charged with 8 new murder counts, and court documents released today give more details of Dahmer's gruesome killing spree. Roseanne Tejas was in Milwaukee and joins us now with the latest. Roseanne.
Oh, Rick and Allison, boiled heads, body parts stored in a freezer, and having sex with dead victims are just some of Dahmer's confessions made public today. Relatives of victims say it wasn't easy to be in court, but they wanted to see that justice is done.
We are here this afternoon.
In all, Dahmer is now charged with 12 counts of intentional homicide. The judge raised his $1 million bail to $5 million cash, and all agreed the victims' bodies should now be returned to the families.
There is no reason to ask that any of the body parts remain and that they should be released to the families.
But there aren't many remains. In most cases, the families identified their loved ones through photographs taken by Dahmer. Police recovered parts of 11 bodies at Dahmer's Milwaukee apartment, but he's confessed to at least 17 killings. After seeing Dahmer, many victims' families say they think he's killed even more.
The man has admitted to a very, very horrific story. And if people say that there's more there than what he's admitted to, that's up to them to come forth with the proof.
As the prosecutor points out, that doesn't necessarily mean they have to have a body. In fact, for one murder count filed, they don't.
It is premised on a photograph and is not premised on an examination or identification of a bodily part.
The significant thing is that he goes to prison, to Waupun, as I said, as opposed to any other prison, and don't receive any special treatments, and I will feel that justice has been done.
As difficult as it was for victims' families to go to the courthouse, they tell me they had to be here so Dahmer could see the pain he's caused.
To see the hurt, the sorrow, the pain, and all the uproar that he had brought to our city.
I can't stand seeing him. And then
For some families, today was the first time they heard the horrifying and heartbreaking details of what Dahmer did to their loved ones, at least Dahmer's side of the story. In a criminal complaint, Dahmer claims he drugged all of his victims, strangled them, and usually had sex with them after death. Then he says he dismembered the bodies, in one case disposing of the flesh except for the biceps, which he kept in the freezer. He also describes boiling a head to remove the skin, enabling him to keep and paint the skull, a ritual he would repeat victim after victim.
Seeing him, it made me sick to my stomach. It just made me think of all the things that he did and the way he went about doing them. And you know,
He was face to face with the families of his victims.
I think he could kill another 20 if he had time to do it, yeah.
A courtroom showdown for the Milwaukee murderer. Good evening. Our top story, new charges tonight for the man whose crime spree began with murder but did not stop there. Jeffrey Dahmer in court for the second time since police put him behind bars and put a stop to his killings. Here's the latest. 8 new counts of murder filed against Dahmer. That makes 12 so far. Also, the court agrees to release the remains of his victims to their families. And tonight, police have identified Dahmer's 16th victim.
We begin tonight with a stunning showdown in a courtroom packed with emotion. Families getting their first chance to see the man who is accused of killing their loved ones. Prosecutors also had a chance to build their case against Jeffrey Dahmer. Channel 2's Jay Levine was there.
Linda, tonight, newly released court documents reveal a killer so callous, so caught up in his crimes, that after a while, killing apparently became very, very easy. His victims' skulls kept as some kind of grotesque souvenirs. It is a story which has shocked not only a city, but a nation, and today drew overflow crowds to the courtroom. This is what they had to go through just to get inside, waiting for hours before marching through metal detectors, then being patted down by police officers. All for this, a glimpse of Jeffrey Dahmer in his Orange County Jail jumpsuit, arriving to hear the rest of the state's case against him, to be charged with 8 more murders, 12 in all.
You're also charged in habitual criminality, which carries an additional 10 years on each count. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
You also understand the nature of these proceedings, the complaint itself?
Yes, Your Honor.
While prosecutors have filed charges in the 12 cases where there are human remains, photographs, or both, Dahmer admits to killing 17, all in states without the death penalty.
All of the incidences that have taken place in the state of Wisconsin, except one in Ohio. He holds to that statement this date.
11 of the 12 murder charges filed so far involve murders committed at Dahmer's apartment, where the evidence includes 4 human heads found in a freezer and refrigerator and 7 skulls, several of them painted gray to disguise them. Killing became so routine for Dahmer that once he stopped at a local bar for a beer while one victim lay drugged in his apartment 2 blocks away. But when he came outside and went home to finish off the job, he found that victim, 14-year-old Konarak Sinthasompan, had escaped and was staggering around the street. Police had already been called, and Dahmer had to talk his way out of that one before he could kill the youth. That narrow escape led to more frequent murders. Beginning on June 30th, he killed once a week, until finally, on July 22nd, another would-be victim escaped and brought police back with him.
Based upon the nature and gravity of the offenses, defendant's prior criminal record, the court's going to increase the bail to $5 million cash for the case.
The evidence also shows Dahmer took photos while dismembering the bodies of victims and performed sex acts on them after they were dead. While the defense team is clearly laying the groundwork for some kind of insanity defense, prosecutors say, not so fast.
Well, we never stipulate to that in terms, I can't tell you that's his decision, but we never, as a long-standing policy, if that's the issue, it will be contested. There will not be an agreement on that.
About an hour before he released those new documents in court today, D.A. McCann met with victims' families, telling many of them for the first time exactly how their loved ones had died. Channel 2's Elizabeth Vargas was with those families today, and she has their story. Elizabeth?
Jay, I spoke with many of the victims' families tonight. They say they don't regret coming here today. They say they're happy and it was important for them to be here. Nearly 50 of them came to this Milwaukee courthouse today and waited for hours for a chance to see Milwaukee's mass murderer for themselves. One by one, they filed in, silent, grim, determined to confront the man who has caused so much anguish, to see the killer who robbed them of so much.
I just had to see who murdered my brother and just look at him.
I just wanted to see what type of person could commit those kinds of crimes, you know.
They filled nearly half the courtroom, many with pictures of loved ones pinned to their chests, hoping the confessed killer would see his victims were loved.
My heart still hurts. You know, he's taken someone that my grandparents had brought in, who gave him the right.
Samuel Free and others like him could only sit in silence today. They will see the news reports that describe how Dahmer drugged their brothers, killed their fathers, dismembered their sons. These families are still waiting for the mutilated remains of their loved ones so they can bury them. And they are still waiting for answers. What kind of man kills so many so brutally?
He did not look at none of our faces, you know. He didn't see our faces.
He doesn't give a damn. Looks like he doesn't care at all. He has no remorse at all. I think he could kill another 20 if he had time to do it.
Today, the judge cleared the way for police to begin releasing some of the victims' remains to their families so they can now begin burying them. But many families will never have that chance. Police say many victims' remains will never be found. Live in Milwaukee, I'm Elizabeth Vargas, Channel 2 News.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Police tonight are revealing the identity of another of Dahmer's victims. This is a high school photo of Stephen Toomey, now the 16th known victim of Dahmer. He was 24 years old when his parents reported him missing. That was back in September of 1987. He was living in Milwaukee when he disappeared. His picture was among the photos found inside Dahmer's apartment. Most of the evidence against Jeff Dahmer is contained in his own chilling confession. Tonight, Channel 2's Jim Avila has obtained the original police report that details Dahmer's confession. Jim?
Linda, Jeffrey Dahmer was anxious to confess. In this police report and confession obtained by Channel 2 News, Dahmer practically begs detectives to listen. In fact, when they are ready to go home after 6 hours of jailhouse confessions, he asks them to stay around and talk some more about the murders.
From the moment police walked into his apartment, Jeffrey Dahmer talked. By the time he reached the Milwaukee City Jail, he had admitted to mass murder. Formal questioning began with 2 homicide detectives at 1:15, the morning after his July 23rd arrest. By 7:15, Milwaukee police had their case. The homicide file was opened. There were multiple victims. Jeffrey Dahmer had signed a 4-page confession, each page initialed by the killer. During 6 hours of questioning, Dahmer smokes numerous cigarettes, drinks 5 cups of coffee, 2 glasses of water, and 2 cans of Coca-Cola. In between puffs and swallows, he admits and coldly describes 15 killings. Dahmer explains the killing process. First, sex. Dahmer says it was never forced, always willing. Then the victim is served a special drink of rum and coffee mixed with sleeping pills. In a daze or passed out, his victim is murdered, the body disposed of by mutilation.
The 24-page police report includes 8 pages of Polaroids, sadistic snapshots of what went on inside Dahmer's apartment, a virtual horror chamber.
Police count 6 skulls, 3 from his latest victim still in the refrigerator, 3 more preserved for display on the apartment bookcase. Dahmer's explanation, quote, he only kept the good-looking ones because he did not want to lose them. Other body parts of a more sexual nature were stored in formaldehyde, displayed in jars, and used for sexual gratification because they, quote, brought back memories of the victim. Throughout the confession, Dahmer talked about motive. This report reveals that Dahmer feared rejection. He was paranoid about being left behind, so he hunted and killed only homosexuals who had become his one-night stand lovers. Quote, he felt he could hang on to them if he would kill them and keep their skulls.
Milwaukee police made sure Jeffrey Dahmer could not later claim coercion. He had plenty to drink, smokes, access to the restroom. They even offered him food before they left. Dahmer turned them down, saying, quote, I'm not hungry and probably will not be hungry for a long time. Bill and Linda?
As the story of what went on in Jeffrey Dahmer's apartment spreads, many question what Dahmer's neighbors were doing, apparently oblivious to his crimes. Tonight, Channel 2's Lester Holt went back to apartment 213 and found Dahmer's neighbors are also paying the price.
What the gawkers point at and call Jeffrey's house of horrors is the Oxford Apartments.
Tonight, no trespassing signs hang prominent, and the flags fly at half-staff for Dahmer's victims, but also for beleaguered residents who have been shot at, harassed, bothered, and revolted by the events of the last 3 weeks. Enough, said the man from behind locked doors. Are you going to stay? As many as half the residents have moved out of this apartment building over the last several days. What happened behind these boarded windows was a disaster. And tonight, a Milwaukee citizen and the Red Cross are treating it as such.
An anonymous donor is providing them with housing in a public place.
Courtroom today. As a result, Dahmer is charged in 8 more killings for a total of 12. His bail is raised to $5 million cash, and some of the victims' remains will be returned to their families, many of whom came face to face with Dahmer today in court. A special section of the courtroom was set aside for relatives of the victims, many of whom had come to see the man accused of the murders. In contrast with his last appearance, Jeffrey Dahmer was clean-shaven when he walked into court, wearing orange prison coveralls. And his attorney, Gerald Boyle, said Dahmer was ready to face the new charges.
He understands the nature of the proceedings against him, and he is able to assist me and Ms. Patricus. Therefore, there is no challenge to competency.
Dahmer showed no emotion as the judge announced the new charges.
As to counts 1 through 8, you are charged with first-degree intentional homicide, which carries a life imprisonment penalty. In addition thereto, you're also charged in habitual criminality, which carries an additional 10 years on each count. Do you understand that?
Yes, I do, Your Honor.
The prosecution then asked that Dahmer's bail be increased. There was no objection from the defense, and the judge raised the bail to $5 million cash. Next, the prosecutor asked that the body parts still being held as evidence be released to the victims' families for proper burial.
It is my belief that there is no reason to ask that any of the body parts remain and that they should be released to the families. Mr. Dahmer wholeheartedly agrees.
Discuss that aspect of with your lawyer, Mr. Dahmer?
Yes, we did, Your Honor.
Are you in a complete agreement with that?
I'm in agreement.
And based upon the stipulation of both counsels, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the remains be released, then the court will so order it.
Dahmer could be charged with up to 5 more murders for a total of 17 at his next court date on August 22nd.
Was Dahmer insane when he allegedly committed his crimes? The question being raised for the first time now by his attorney. Channel 5's Ray Suarez has more details live from Milwaukee. Ray?
Carol, the attorney, Gerald Boyle, is hinting that it could take until early next year to determine whether Jeffrey Dahmer was sane at the time that he committed his crimes. So far tonight, only the family of Konarak Sinthasomphone has had a funeral home claim the remains and prepare them for burial. Many relatives and friends of Dahmer's victims were also in court today, as you reported. As the nephew of one dead man said, he had to see Jeffrey Dahmer's face.
I've seen him in the past on TV. He had no remorse on his face of what he's done, and he still doesn't have any.
And Shirley Hughes, the mother of another victim, said despite her grief, she had to be in court for one simple reason.
And this made me feel better to see the person that they say done these things.
The family members sat in their own section of the court and left the chamber under police escort. But the large number of spectators who crowded the room were pulled, like the family, by the need to see the man who's admitted to killing so many.
I can understand how the people could have fell for his stories, because he doesn't look like the type of person that would commit the crimes that he did.
The accused serial killer will be back in court later in August, and Milwaukee's district attorney says there'll probably be more murder charges filed then. In the murders Dahmer is admitted to, there's one body still unidentified and several IDs with no bodies. In today's charges came new information on the death of Konarak Sinthasomphone. Dahmer has told police that he drugged the Laotian-born teen, that Sinthasomphone fell asleep, and then Dahmer went to get beer, finding the boy naked in the streets when he returned from the store. Police escorted the boy back to Dahmer's apartment, and he was killed a few minutes after they left. And while Dahmer's attorney says his client is competent to stand trial, his defense may hinge on Dahmer's sanity at the time the crimes were committed.
He is competent to understand what's going on about him and to join in that. But what he was at any given day in the past, I have no idea.
And earlier today, Stephen Toomey has been identified as the 16th known murder victim of Jeffrey Dahmer. Toomey lived in Milwaukee, was originally from Michigan, and like several other victims, was identified only by a photo, not from human remains. Joan, Carol, back to you.
Thank you, Ray. Meanwhile, about 20 residents of the building where Dahmer allegedly dismembered 11 victims are spending another night at an undisclosed Milwaukee hotel. The horror of what Dahmer says he did in his apartment has proven too much to handle for many of them. Some say they've been harassed by strangers for not notifying police about the stench or the noise from Dahmer's apartment.
I haven't been sleeping and I haven't been eating, and my life has been like a nightmare.
An anonymous donor is paying the hotel bill for the residents until they can find a permanent place to live.